Folks, if you're joining us, I'm just giving everyone a moment to sign in and get settled. Please feel free to let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from today. You know, we've got some folks from all over the country and beyond on these sessions, which is a lot of fun to see. Actually, the art behind Kate and the art behind Greg is kind of complementary. I just noticed.
Yeah.
Well chosen backgrounds, everybody. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to preview week for Willamette, the Pinot Noir auction. The 2019 Willamette Valley wines featured in this tasting series are exclusive small lot bottlings for our wine trade auction. If you don't know about the auction and you'd like to learn more about how to purchase these wines, contact Emily at the WVWA, and I put her email address in the chat. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our auction sponsors for their ongoing support. And a very big special thank you to our Imperial sponsor, Winebow. And now I'd like to introduce today's panelists. Representing Lot 39, Marcus Goodfellow, Goodfellow Family Cellars. Representing lot number 41, Ken Wright of Ken Wright Cellars. Representing lot number 42, Kate Norris of Division Winemaking Company. Representing lot number 43, Adam Campbell of Elk Cove Vineyards. Representing lot number 44, Spencer Spetnagle of Durant Vineyards. Representing lot number 45, Greg Ralston of LAVINEA. And now I'll introduce our moderator, John Gabelhausen of Alexana Winery. John, take it away.
Thank you, Julia. You know, the barrel auction is in its 6th year, and it is the leading event to showcase the Willamette Valley Pinot Noir while supporting the promotion of this exceptional wine growing region. The wine trade really gets to experience what makes Oregon remarkable, exemplified in a unique expression of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in the region's top wineries. Our auction is on August 5th. And it's a hybrid event following an in-person and virtual bidding. Fundraising goes towards supporting the Willamette Valley Wineries Association, education, and marketing initiatives as well as our charitable partner. We've got a fascinating panelist of winemakers. You know, I was kind of looking back at all of your history, and there's some people that have been around the block a little bit in this panel. So really excited to talk to you. Let us know a little bit about you and your brand, and most importantly, really dive into your auction lot. So we're going to start with Goodfellow Winery, lot number 39, first pick. It's a 5-case lot by Marcus Goodfellow. Marcus, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you were founded in 2002 and it's a family-owned winery. Tell us, kind of touch a little bit about you and your winery, and then let's dive right into your wine.
All right. For myself, I'm an Oregon native. I grew up over on the east side of the valley, just about 8 miles outside of Silverton. We had an 80-acre farm growing up, but without any grapes. It was primarily blueberries and Douglas fir. Really remarkably beautiful place, and something that very much attuned me to the seasonal changes that go with the Willamette Valley. You grow up in the country, I think everyone needs to go out and find the big wide world for a little bit. I randomly wound up in Los Angeles looking to go to college. I was down there for 6 years and caught the wine bug from a friend who I met in Los Angeles. When I moved back up to Oregon, I started working in restaurants and primarily focusing on both the bar and running wine lists. I wound up working with a French master chef named Philippe Boulot at the Heathman. And then in 2002, decided that I should start trying to make some of my own wine. Sorry, there's a very large truck that suddenly, the first time all day that anybody's driven past. 2002, I put together a little bit of money and we made 3 tons of fruit. It was 189 cases in a friend's winery. And we've evolved from that up to about 4,000 cases annually. There are two people that work in the winery, myself and my partner, Megan Joy, and we focus primarily on terroir within the Willamette Valley. We're looking at individual vineyards with a sort of a microscopic view. The lot that we have today is actually a view from the Lumen Vineyard, which is down in the Eola Amity Hills. This is one of the more remarkable properties, I think, in the valley. Dennis Lumen planted it in 1993. It was farmed organically from the very beginning. And Dennis really bootstrapped up as well. So there's a lot of very individual nature in the farming and the planting that he has there. With the vintage of 2019, unfortunately, Dennis was diagnosed with terminal cancer and passed in the spring. So this is the last of the fruit that we had that was truly connected to his farming and his choices. The lot that we have, the first pick, the reason that we chose that name is that I was a raft guide for a number of years. And as a river rafter, there are some rivers that you can hop on and you just pile on down, and it doesn't really matter which place or where you're at. It's just a lot of fun. And there are other rivers where you very distinctly have to make choices and you pick your line. And once you pick your line, that's that section that you're working through. All of your decision making from that point on is defined basically by that original choice. And I think with 2019, where you saw a cool growing season, one that really gave us an opportunity for very elegant, very beautiful wines, something I think many of us still aspire to, winemaking in the style of Burgundy, where you have that true elegance of Pinot Noir. Looking at that, we tasted through prior to some weather that was coming in. And as we worked through the vineyards, we came to Lumen and found that there was a small portion of the Pommard that was ready to go and a small amount of the 777 that Dennis had planted. So we took about half of our fruit on the front side of the weather, and we let the rest of it sit through the weather and picked that once we came out the other side. It gave us two very distinct looks. This is arguably, for me, I think the prettiest of the wines that we made. It's a single fermenter. There were very, very small crop loads in 19. And unfortunately at Dennis's place, because it had been farmed on the fly, there was a little bit of loss to mildew. It's a small vineyard though, and we were splitting it with Walter Scott and Violin. So this section represents 5 cases from the single fermenter that we picked on the front side of the weather, and that we basically at that point managed from a standpoint of a very early, very borderline pick. This is in fermenter for about 45 days to help elevate texture. It has a 50% whole cluster and showcases, I think, an extraordinarily beautiful combination of fruit and still the smoky sort of density that you can get from the wind-affected area of the Eola Amity Hills. For those who don't know, the Lumen Vineyard is tucked in between Bethel Heights Estate and adjacent to the Justice Vineyard and Temperance Hill. So this little 6-acre block is really kind of like, you're definitely in some of the very best territory for grape growing in the valley. Dennis has a little bit of a flat shelf in between Justice and Bethel Heights, which means that he catches a little bit less direct sunshine, which keeps the sugars very balanced. He has great natural acidity, and the vineyard is naturally low vigor, which is something that I really prefer these days. I think as Oregon gets warmer and warmer, vineyards that produce less leaves will become more and more important.
What's the elevation at that vineyard site?
Dennis is right about 400 feet.
So tell us a little bit about the nuances in the flavor profile and the aromatics of this for your lot.
I think one of my favorite things for this lot was watching the layering and complex nature of it. It's very elegant. Now, one, we utilize a lot of stems, and then we tend to have a very throttled back style to begin with. So you're seeing aromatically a little bit of smoke, which I think of as this fruit came in and it was very, very dense. There's small berries, very thick skins. The stems were a significant portion of the cluster. So punch downs were very challenging. And so you get just a little bit of a reductive nature in the beginning. It pairs extremely well then with Dennis has sort of almost a violet fruit hue. He moves a little bit to sort of the strawberry cherry, but there's just this really beautiful floral tone around the smoke. And when you think about smoke and flowers, these are two very contrasting flavors. If I had to pick one word for this wine, it would be layered. The ability to dig into it have it evolve and change in the glass and really kind of keep you coming back looking for all of the little things. There's just the right amount of stem nuance, in my opinion. There's just the right amount of floral input. It's a very cool ferment, so there's a good amount of yeast ester still, and the fruit is very vibrant. Certainly, we're always focused on making wines to cellar, but in my opinion, this is arguably one that will be at its very best somewhere between 10 and 20 years in the bottle.
Yeah, we talked about that in the first panel discussion we did at ageability, and we're going to touch a little more on that after we go through all, everyone's lot here. Thank you so much. Fascinating story on that vineyard and how you made the wine. We're going to move on next to Ken Wright, lot number 41, A Hint of Corruption. It's a 5-case lot. Ken, you're one of the pioneers, established in 1994 in Carlton, producing wines from 13 different unique vineyard sites. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your lot?
Thanks, Sean. Actually, I'm going to go back in history a little bit, if you don't mind. So I started in 1978 in California, making wine it was in a coastal area, close to between Salinas Valley and the Pacific, making wines for Chalon and for Ventana Vineyards for a number of years, from 78 to 82. And incredibly fortunate as a young person who knew literally nothing to have gotten a job that put me in the world of Dick Graff, who created Chalon. The year I started, he started a research group called the Small Winery Technical Society. We met at Mount Eden once a month all through the year. And in that group, we had Stephen Kistler from Sonoma. We had Josh Jensen and Steve Dorner from Calera, Rick Foreman from Napa, Rich Sanford from Santa Barbara, Larry Brooks from Acacia. It was really, of course, Mount Eden as well. It was really the who's who of producers of Pinot Noir in California at the time. And we had 2 French producers who were mimicking our research. And that was Jacques Cesse at Domaine Dujac and Aubert Valland at the Domaine de la Romanicanti, DRC. And this was the year that the fax was invented, everybody, 1978. And so because I knew the least, they made me take all the meeting minutes, and then I would take those and then send them by fax to Aubert and to Jacques in Burgundy. I'm still amazed how that all works, that you can get that information down a phone line. But so that experience really taught me the value of collegial experimentation. When everybody's completely open, there are no secrets. Everyone is in the mood to learn and to share. It was an incredibly valuable time for 4 years there. I was then hired by the Robert Talbot family in the Carmel Valley to create a winery and vineyards for them in the Carmel Valley, which I did for 4 years. So from 82 to 86. And then I handed the keys to the son, who was my age, to take over, which had been the plan all along for them. I came to Oregon because I had visited in Oregon in the 70s a lot. And I'd had about a half dozen experiences with Pinot Noir from this area, especially this core area where you find the 680s now. This core area were magnificent. Wines were still very uneven at the time in Oregon for a lot of reasons. Very uneven, but in years where Mother Nature was kind, the wines were amazingly great. We've all stepped up our game big time, both in the vineyard and the winery, but particularly in the vineyard with acreage contracts and other ways of making compelling wines in even the most difficult years here. So I started in 86 here with my own, not 94 actually. And I created Panther Creek Cellars and did that from 86 to 94. Reinvented myself in 94 as Ken Wright Cellars. The focus had been for me from 90 forward, especially once I'd gotten to understand most of the regions, we'd sourced fruit from everywhere in this area. And once we began to understand the traits, the profiles of the wines from the different AVAs that we have now, they weren't AVAs then, but we began to see consistency in aromatic profile, flavor profile, textures from these different areas. And then we began doing single vineyard bottlings. And for quite a while, we were pretty much alone doing that. And then in 95, we brought the industry together in '95. There were several of us that brought the industry together to create the sub-AVAs. I ended up authoring the Yamhill Carlton. We did 5 others as well. Names you know, like Dundee, Ribbon Ridge, Chehalem, et cetera. The wine that we're offering has an interesting history. You know, the history books about the Oregon industry are completely wrong, by the way. They all say the industry started in '65. It did not. It did not. It started in '66. What happened is David Lett did come up and he did nursery his vines. I knew David very well. We spent a lot of time together. We were 4 blocks from each other, so we were sharing cups of sugar all the time. He nurseryed his vines in '90.
Hopefully that sugar was for your coffee.
It was actually tartaric acid, but whatever. Yeah, right. So, in '65, he had his vines nurseryed at Oregon State, but he didn't plant until '66. Both he and Charles Curry both came from UC Davis. Both had masters. They both believed in this area. In fact, Marcus, you're from Silverton, right? So the guys. So David and Charles got an apartment in Silverton first. I don't know if you know this. They got an apartment. They believed that Silverton was going to be the world-class heart of the industry. And so they got an apartment in Silverton. For 6 months, they looked for property, couldn't find anything, and gave up. And instead, David bought property in the Dundee Hills.
You're killing me. Seriously.
I know. It's crazy. It's crazy, right? It could have been a very different industry. But that's what actually happened. So so David brought Wadensville. He brought the first, the clonal material he brought was Wadensville. Charles ended up going back to Switzerland he did an internship with a professor in Switzerland, and he brought back a clone of Pinot Noir that his professor said was amazing. He booted it in illegally, and he planted it. He ended up actually nurserying it, selling it to a lot of different folks. It's been known over time as the Curry clone, but that's how he got it, and that's how it got here. The clone has always had, for me, a bit of funk, particularly at high elevations. It can be very intriguing. It can be too much in certain situations where it's just over the top, but within the right degree of impact, it can be intriguing, engaging, and really be a fascinating part of the wine's profile. Back in the 70s and 80s, when we were part of that group and we were all about Pinot Noir, one of our phrases we talked about, one of the things we liked about Pinot Noir was this occasional hint of corruption. Just a little bit of a earthy quality, slightly funky, not offensive at all, just at a level that it was just super intriguing. And so so we did name our lot this year, which is Curry planted at Freedom Hill Vineyard. And so this is at, I think, the perfect elevation, around 500 feet, 550 for this clone. I think it performs best at this elevation. And so we're working with that again. And so in fact, I have a bottle. This is you can tell, but this is a Curry bottling of American Riesling. So he was sourcing Riesling from Washington and Oregon. So he had to call it American, couldn't call it Oregon or Washington either, it had to be the combination. But this is from 1972.
So hold on, Ken, I'm assuming you're showing us that because after this, you want us all to drive to where you're at so you can open that for us? Is that why you're showing it?
So John, just so you know, this is a Riesling and it's black as night inside this bottle. This was found in the cellar of a friend in Portland, and it obviously got way overheated. So
yeah, I see.
Bummer. I thought you were going to bring it to the after party, Ken.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally bummed.
Ken's house.
It's a memento only, So I'm really just very pleased to be with you all. All these people on this panel are terrific people and making really great wine, and it's so fantastic to see how this industry has grown and the how fiercely passionate people are, and just fiercely passionate. And I love that. it's a great thing.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the history. I know all of our panelists and people attending this virtual call love to hear the history of Oregon because it's come so far in such a short amount of time. And it's all because, you know, all of us and pioneers like yourself have done so much work leading into this, and you guys believed in Oregon, and that's why we're all here. So really appreciate that. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to Division Winemaking, lot number 32. Love the name of this, Beyond the Dream, a 5-case lot by Kate and Thomas. Kate, take it away. Tell us a little bit about your lot, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm so honored to be here in this room with everybody. You know, I think I'm the newest kid on the block for sure, actually. Hearing Ken's history of how far he has brought our industry from even before I was born was pretty amazing. So it's really cool. So I'm Kate. I'm the winemaker for Division Winemaking Company with my business partner, Tom. And we've been making wine in Oregon since 2010. We actually have an urban winery in Portland. And I actually decided to move here thanks to someone else that's on this panel. I've told this story a billion times, but it never gets old. Adam Campbell is one of my inspirations of all time. It's a bottle of, yeah, he's the best. Bottle of his Roosevelt Vineyard that I had at Nick's Italian Cafe in 2009 is really sort of what sealed the deal for me. And I moved from France to start our career here. And in 2010 was making just over 300 cases. And now we make just over the 7,000 case mark. So it's really been a dream to get here. Tom and I decided on our lot for this year to bottle a single vineyard designate from the Cassin Vineyard, which is Powell Ranch, which is located in the Yamhill Carlton AVA. And we lease and farm the whole vineyard thanks to the owners, Joe and Julie Cassin, with the help of Jessica Cortell, who's an incredible farmer. We actually met Joe and Julie through our charity work with the Maybell Center, which is here in Portland. It's an organization that works to bring community and connection for those that are living on the fringes of our society. So a really important cause for Tom and I, and also that has really allowed our friendship and partnership with the Cassin family to blossom. And that's what started in 2015. The Cassins planted their vineyard in 2012, and it butts right up against the coastal range in the foothills right west of McMinnville. And while the Yamhill Carlton, I think, is more typically known for its sedimentary soils, this site features Yamhill Jory soil, so volcanic and deep and full of iron. It's that amazing rich red that we all love. And it's at high elevation. It's at about 700 feet. And that elevation and the proximity to the coastal range and the water retention that we get from the soils means that it is our latest ripening site for Pinot in the whole Willamette Valley from all of the vineyards we work with, which is a little uncommon, I think, for the Yamhill Carlton too, which I think tends to be a little bit earlier. So we picked this vineyard in 2019 towards the end of October. And it's a clonal mix of Pommard and 777 and Badensville that we're really starting to see develop its own unique, delicious profile and bottle. And that's, I think, why we chose to spotlight it. It's the imminent potential is really here. And I think it was a perfect lot to choose for the auction this year. We have a fair amount of fruit, given we take the whole vineyards. It's about 20 acres. And we ferment about 7 different lots of Pinot each vintage, sort of varying our fermentation styles, all from closed off carbonic to up to open top, about 50% whole cluster. And each lot is actually fermented with a Pied de Cuve that we start off of the vineyard. So a yeast start that's specific to that place in the world that we allow to start off the fermentation before letting the ambient yeasts in our winery really take over to finish. And we barrel each lot separately. And for this particular bottling, we chose 2 of our favorite lots from the vineyard. These are more traditionally fermented with actually a lower percentage of whole cluster, just to make 5 cases. I'm really excited about it. You know, it's on the nose, has wild cherry and clove and raspberries and a little bit of eucalyptus. And I really think that it speaks to the 2019 vintage, which for us is one of our favorites since 2010. We had a warm summer, but really long, cool hang times, which I think gives us this beautiful phenolic ripeness with relatively modest alcohols and really mouth-watering acidity. I think the longevity is going to be incredible. So yeah, I can't wait for everybody to try it. And Beyond the Dream, it's actually a reference to one of my favorite bands. Everyone's going to laugh. I'm a Fish fan, but whatever, that's fine. But it's also really a dream to be able to lease a full vineyard and to be able to watch it come into potential and for it to be a part of our family for a long time to come. It's something that I'm really thankful that Joe and Julie entrusted us with, and we can't wait for that dream to continue. And the dream's in this room too, which is so cool.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. We're going to move on to lot number 43, Elk Cove, the Matterhorn. It's a 5-case lot by Adam Campbell. Adam, tell us a little bit about the lot and yourself. We've got another pioneer here in the Oregon wine community with a lot of history. Go for it, Adam.
Yeah, pioneer through family. I think I had the fortune of growing up in the industry. My parents started Elk Cove and came out to what's now the Yamhill Carlton AVA back in 1973, 74. And we lived in a little trailer house getting ready to plant our first 10 acres of vines, all from Chuck Curry's nursery, Pinot Noir Chardonnay. And we lived in a little trailer house and a big herd of elk came and hung out with us that first winter, which is why we named it Elk Cove. And my parents, certainly were very focused and passionate about Pinot Noir. And those first 10 acres of grapes are all volunteer labor, which is basically why my parents had 5 kids, so we could all be out there digging holes and putting vines in. And I think, in the early days, there was a lot of energy. Of course, all the vines were extremely young. Ken referenced that earlier with, a lot of variability, some amazing wines in those early days, and then some really tough ones. And I think with vine age and getting the viticulture all settled, we've settled into really being able to make some amazing wines. When my parents first planted grapes, there was only about 100 acres of vineyards in Oregon. And I think now there's, well, someone can correct me, but I think there's about 30,000. And just so many people passionate, sharing my parents' passion and then mine for these amazing cool climate wines that we can do. So I want to thank all the panelists. It's lovely to see your faces. I can't wait to get to see you in person and get to try your wines. And then thank you to all the folks that have joined the Zoom call. It's nice to be able to truly dig in. In some ways, it's better for us to be able to talk about these wines in a little broader sense than if you were just standing at the table and moving on to the next wine. So when I thought about what wine we wanted to do for the auction, we wanted to kind of give honor and a little bit of history to my family's story. It's called the Matterhorn. And basically my great-grandfather immigrated to Oregon from Switzerland and started a dairy farm in what's now Helvetia. There was a Swiss-German community. And so he was a dairyman and they cut timber. And then my grandfather was kind of rebellious and ended up going up to Hood River Valley and growing apples and pears for a living. So he was a pear farmer up in Hood River. And he was a big influence on my parents. And when they decided they wanted to do grapes, he was a great resource. And they came to the Willamette Valley again in the really early days. I just feel really fortunate that, I'm glad I'm not a dairy farmer. It's kind of cool, but it's hard to make a living. And I get to grow grapes and make a value-added product that brings people joy, that brings dollars back to Oregon. And so, very fortunate.
We're glad too, Adam.
Yeah, I'd rather be drinking your Pinot Noir instead of your, you know, the milk you've been producing. So tell us a little bit about the vineyard and the clones you used for this lot.
Yeah, so the name Matterhorn is also a reference to, this is our La Boheme vineyard, which is, you know, certainly back in the day was probably the highest elevation quality vineyard in all of Oregon. It tops out at well over 800 feet. And I think especially being on the west side of the valley, when we planted, a lot of people thought that we probably wouldn't get these grapes ripe. But what's amazing about this vineyard, it's such steep slopes, own rooted. So these are not on rootstock, which is, you know, is a problem long-term. But in a year like 2019, we might get into this a little bit later, but, you know, we had a bit of a rain event in mid-September, and that was a little bit hard on some of our other vineyards. So in addition to La Boheme, we also farm and own another almost 400 acres in the valley. And grapes that were almost ready to be ripe and be picked, the rain was a little bit problematic, but own-rooted vines, well-drained soils, I think it just gave them a bit of a drink and an inspiration for further ripening. And we picked well into October, which is kind of classic for own-rooted, high elevation vines. These are, we call it Pomard clone, but all our rootstock, or all the plant material came from Chuck Curry, and it was all a bit of a mishmash in terms of what you get. We've done some improvement on that clone over the years, and including selections to plant into La Boheme, but, really focusing on smaller clusters, smaller berries, things that, you know, even in a warming climate, I think Pinot Noir, because, you know, obviously all the color, but most of the flavor and aromatics comes from the skins, not from the pulp. We all know that. So if we can get these small clusters and small berries, and 19 was a classic vintage for that, we have a lot of intensity of flavor. And then as a winemaker, like the rest of the panelists, we can be extremely gentle and just kind of let the grapes sing on their own. So.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Fascinating background. The wine sounds fantastic. We're going to move on to the next lot number 44, Durant Vineyards. Rule of thirds. It's 5 case by Spencer. Spencer, take it away for us.
Good afternoon. I'm Spencer Spetnagle of Durant. Ken and Penny Durant first planted the property in 1973. So they've been in the industry for quite a long time. But they've been providing fruit to the valley most of the time. And even still today, we only produce about 35% of the property. The original planting was about 3 acres, and they had 16 acres. And like Ken said, they were actually looking for property in the valley floor, but they couldn't afford that because of the hazelnuts. So they moved up the hill where the land was a little cheaper, and lucky for us. So since over the last 48 years, they've piecemealed the property together from the original 16 acres. It's now 135 acres in total. There's 65 acres of vines, 17 acres of olive oil or olive trees. And they run the only commercial olive mill in the Pacific Northwest too. So they continue the pioneering spirit. They finally got around to building a winery in 2018, just 45 years later. And I was lucky enough to move to the North Valley from Eugene in 2017. And a friend who used to work with them said, if you ever move north, you should reach out to the Durant family. They're lovely. They've thought about a winery and a winemaker, but never pulled the trigger. And the timing worked out that I cold emailed Paul Durant, the son, and said, I'm moving up there. What's your timeline? And it happened that they were building in 18. So I said, oh, you should hire me now so I can help you procure all the equipment and design the layout of the winery. And so far, so good. So we're 100% estate farmed and estate grown and produced wine. My 2019 barrel auction, Rule of Thirds, is from our 3 elevations on the property. Essentially, we have about 20 acres at 250 to 330 feet, 18 acres in the 400 to 480 feet, and then one more set of blocks up about 500 to 630 feet. And so this is a third of from the lower elevation, the mid elevation, and the upper elevation. It's 100% Pommard. It's a 33% whole cluster, 33% new oak. It's 3 individual barrels from each one block, or 1 barrel from each of those blocks. So it's a third across the board. And 2019 was what I think of as my first Oregon vintage, even though I moved up in 12. But 12 to 18, I wouldn't say were typical, what I thought of as typical Oregon vintages. And so it was a lot of fun to have a cooler summer. I think I heard Shannon Gustafson yesterday say that there was only 1 north of 90-degree day over the summer.
Right.
And it was in June. And so it was just super even keeled all summer long. Cool nights, nothing past the 80s really, just like perfection. And then we get to September and rain comes in the forecast, and as starting in California and then being up here 12 to 18, rain is not something I've had a lot of practice with during harvest. And as I'm worrying and everything, Jason Lett of Irie Vineyards posted this really great Instagram post of just like, everybody relax.
Chill out.
We've been dealing with rain during harvest for decades, and y'all all need to just chill and not pull everything just because rain's in the forecast. Like, if your fruit's in good shape, let it ride. The grapes are used to it. The wines are used to it. They'll be fine. And that was a really good wake up call for me to calm myself down a little bit and know that I had more time and I didn't have to fill my whole cellar, in 3 days. But as everyone says, a cool, long harvest. The alcohols are low, the acids are high, the elegance is intense. It's very elegant and light, but there's this depth and intensity through all the layers of fruit and earth and spice box that is something I've been striving for in my Pinot Noirs. And so I am really excited to present this wine. I find it, traditional Dundee Hills. It's red fruit forward. There is this blueberry undertone, crushed violets, this really aromatic, high lifted floral tone. The spice box goes from nutmeg and clove to a little cumin. Earth tones is dried earth and iron and pine needle. A little savory umami in there. It's not huge on the end of the cheeks, but the acid pulls the cheeks into the palate, and it's just bright and intense. And the tannin structure and the stem structure and the acid just have this really chewy, long finish on the back. And it's so much fun. I can't wait to show it to y'all next week if you're here.
Great. Thank you for that.
You just described my wine.
You're like, next.
Yeah.
With that being said, we're going to move on to lot number 45, the Barrel Select. It's a 10K slot by LAVINEA, Greg Ralston and Isabel Meunier. Greg, take it away.
Thanks, John. LAVINEA started in 2014 when Isabel and I got together as business partners. We had met probably 5 years prior to that, something like that. Isabel was the winemaker at Eveningland Vineyards and was working with Seven Springs, which is a great site. But Isabel's background and training in her foundation was from Burgundy. And she went to school there, graduate degree, but she worked there for several years. And she worked with a multitude of sites. And that was in her sort of winemaking DNA. And when the time came, she wanted to get back to working with various sites. and 2014 offered that opportunity. We started with, I think, 5 vineyards, and were able to secure some fruit from Nisa Vineyard in Dundee, which is where this wine emanates from, largely on Ken's recommendation. I remember Isabel reached out to Ken because he had worked with those same blocks prior to, and with Ken's kind of blessing, we jumped in, and we're super glad we did. LAVINEA's sort of métier is single vineyard wines. We don't generally do anything less than that in terms of selections. So even though we have a very sort of uninteresting block or lot name, Barrel Select, it's something different than what we normally do. And it was a bit of a surprise to us when we went to look for things to create this wine with. We tasted through barrels, and Nisa particularly, it's a very complex wine, but it's always disjointed when it's young. It takes time to sort of knit together. And we tasted this one barrel, a once filled Tarancello, nothing remarkable about it. And it was completely composed at like 10 months in barrel, just completely composed. And it was so delicious even then that it stood out. We continued tasting through other lots, thinking about what we might do. And we kept coming back to this because it was so unusual for us. The vintage itself was one of the reasons, I think, or kind of why Isabel wanted to come to Oregon. She was looking for vintages that would really epitomize cool climate. Wanted rain, wanted cool nights, didn't want heat spikes. And like Spencer was saying, from 12 to 18, it was nothing but. And I think 19 was so refreshing for us because we had water. We had a wet winter. We had some rains during the summer. We had the rains during September a little bit. And that's what she was looking to deal with. It was that cool climate. So for her, I think it was extremely pleasing, particularly with the contrast of 18, which for our wines, drought drove that vintage for us. So the wine itself, 100% Pommard, about an 18-year-old block. You did describe it, Spencer. It's earthy. It's red cherry. It's that red fruit. It's very aromatic. The one thing about Nisa that I think we always love is it's extremely textural, but it takes time. It takes time for that to knit together. And like I said, this one barrel just stood out from the get-go. And I think with the refreshing acidity from the cool nights we had in the vintage, this will be a long-lived wine as well.
Thank you so much for that. That's great. Really looking forward to tasting these lots in person. I wanted to point out real quick that on July 16th, the Willamette Valley received formal recognition and protection by the European Union through Protected Geographical Indication, which is PGI status. They got the approval. It was a major breakthrough in global and brand awareness and a milestone for the Valley's many hardworking wine growers and winemakers. The PGI system protects iconic names of agricultural products, spirit drinks, and wines with a link to their geographical origin, including well-known producers such as Champagne and Barolo. Only 2 American wine regions, Napa Valley and now the Willamette Valley, carry this distinction. And I wanted to thank Harry Peterson-Nedry for all of his efforts in championing this for us. This is a huge breakthrough for the Willamette Valley, and we're really excited. There was a lot of discussions a little bit about pick dates and the 2019 vintage. The Willamette Valley is really large. I think there's, 60 miles at its widest, 150 miles long. There's lots of diversity within the valley. 2019, in my opinion, obviously towards the end when everyone was ready to pick, I think maybe some people were calling in more interns for the sorting table because it was a cooler, damper conditions, lots of sorting, but I kind of find the wines really approachable, bright with acidity, and most likely a really long aging potential, really unique with bright aromatics, dried flowers, And in my opinion, it is, I think you said it, Spencer, it's just a really classic Oregon vintage. I kind of harken back to the 2007, 2013, which I know when those vintages came out, a lot of people were skeptical of those, but honestly, I'm sure a lot of you winemakers and hopefully the people listening in have tried those bottles recently, but they're drinking beautifully. You know, just open discussion for all of you winemakers. Do you want to kind of touch on the 2019 experience for you and how that was, that vintage? Anyone? Adam, you want to go first?
Well, yeah, it was kind of more of a throwback just in terms of having those cool days throughout the summer. Again, I'm not too fussed about whether or when we're going to pick. I mean, between my dad and myself, we had, you know, 45 vintages or so. And I think that, you know, any vintage can be great. One of the things that I think of with 19, and this has to do more with the spring weather that we had, was, and I mentioned it earlier, the small clusters and small berries, which really lead to, you know, our ability as winemakers to make great decisions and not worry too much about trying to extract more or do this or that. It's just, and honestly, even the kind of mid-September rain, we all know that that's not the end of the season. It never has been. And like my grandfather always said, you know, the later the, you know, the bloom time and the later the crop's going to ripen, those are always the years we get, you know, really good weather into the fall. And I think that, you know, we had plenty of opportunities if you chose your windows correctly. And I know I could speak for everybody here that as winemakers, picking decisions is probably certainly in the top half of, maybe, to me, it's probably the most important thing I do is when to pick.
Hey, let me follow up and ask an additional question for all of you, adding on to the 2019 vintage for you. You know, ageability and when you pick, acidity, tannin, alcohol, ripeness. Is there an MVP for each of you on ageability, and especially in a year like 2019 or a warmer year, right? When the Brix levels are higher and then you're worried about phenolic ripeness, how do you all combat that, and what's your philosophy on that?
You have a lot of things that go into that. I think there are a lot of precursors for ageability that come in fruit that's less ripe than when you let it hang for a long time. There's also obviously acidity in terms of efficacy with sulfur, but not just acidity, but actual pH. 2011 has some of their very bright acids in the wines, but the malic levels were higher than normal, and so pHs are actually higher. Those are not particularly wines of mine that I feel are going to have the same evolution. So really it's sort of like you're almost talking about a spider web where you have to, rather than having one thing to look for, you have to kind of tie it all into a specific pattern. 2019, I think that gave it to us in spades. Alcohols are low. So even when you look at higher alcohol wines, obviously as a cellar, the question is, one, whether they'll ever have the elegance, but then two is also, as fruit diminishes, how much is the alcohol going to poke out? So to me, I think 19 is quintessentially the type of vintage that I would look for ageability.
I was going to agree with Marcus. In the matrix, this vintage has it all. You know, it has the fruit, it has the concentration, it has a little bit of tannin, it has all the acid. It's all there for it to be a banger in the future. So I'm really excited to see where this vintage goes. And amazingly enough, they drank really beautifully early on too. So it's going to be a great vintage to watch in our cellars.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that, John, in that we're never just serving a glass of acid or phenolics or tannin. You know, it's got to be the balance of all three to make sure that what we're serving is going to last the test of time. And so it's hard to pick one because what you drink and enjoy is everything put together. And so. Yeah,
great. I wanted to touch on another question. This, you may or may not have an answer for it. This is for the panel. You know, I work with Dr. Ivana in Oregon, at Alexana, at Ravana in Napa, in Corazon del Sol in Argentina. And I want to ask what the most unconventional winemaking advice you've ever received and your lifetime has been, because I remember working with Santiago Achaval. He's our consulting winemaker there. And when I go down there and I start doing, harvest with him, he insists on 20 hours of pump overs a day per tank. And he's rigged this fan to the pump over, blowing on it, and says it blows off a point or two of alcohol. And it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Have you guys experienced in your winemaking journey seen or heard or done anything completely off the wall? Now, this is just shared amongst us. It's not being recorded or anything, right? Come on, open up. Let's hear some stories. Anyone? Ken, I know you got a story, Ken.
Well, it's in the end, off the wall usually doesn't work. But the main thing is to be open. It's like every year, the one thing that's patently clear to me is that Mother Nature has more curveballs than I have years to live. And I continually see, every year we see amazing things that are new to us. We've seen things similar to that, maybe an issue that's developed, but every year we see something we've never seen before, every year. And if you're paying attention, you see it. And so it does require being flexible, being reactive. You can't recipe this world, and certainly not Pinot Noir. If you recipe Pinot Noir, you only hit the mark by accident. You have to be aware of every year and what is before you. So, things like, for a cold year, when you have a challenging year for heat, we do now have the ability to remove crop, lessening the workload of the plant. Our engine, our photosynthetic engine, more or less is the same, our leaf surface, but we can remove the amount of work we're asking the plant to do. In doing so, by removing the work early, we do it in June now. By removing the work early, you don't have to, you're taking away that, or you will end up advancing ripeness 10 days to 2 weeks, easy, avoiding the worst weather of our late fall. It's the opposite reaction in a hot year. If you just go in and say, I'm doing 2 point whatever tons per acre, to me, that's insane foolishness. Because in a hot year, and we are seeing hot years like 3 and 6 and 9 and 15 and 17, in a hot year, you need to use the weight of the fruit as the brake, to put the brake on the plant, because as several of the panelists have said, and I think Adam especially was talking about, hang time's everything. Complex aroma and flavor only happen when you have enough time on the vine. They only happen. That's why Pinot Noir sucks in Napa, because it's just way too hot. And Pinot Noir races. It's the earliest ripening wine variety there is in the DNA of the plant. It's the earliest. So if you put it in a hot place, it's horrible. It races to high sugars. You have to harvest it because the alcohol is going to be stupid. And you end up with a bludgeoning hammer of a wine that has no nuance, no detail. There's no complexity. It's stupid. It's not what Pinot Noir is about. Pinot Noir is all about grace. It's all about nuance.
That's how I really feel, Ken.
Yeah. Well, I hope our Sonoma folks aren't listening.
I love it.
And I'm exactly here because it works. So in a hot year, you leave the crop to slow the plant down because there is no other way to slow it down. It's the only way to slow it down.
I'm gonna argue with you there, Ken. You can leave the crop, and I'm 100% behind you on that, but it's not the only way to slow it down. We're at the point now with vintages where you should also be, instead of dropping fruit, you should be dropping leaves.
Oh, that's fine, but it doesn't begin to stop it like the fruit, like the load, for me.
Yeah.
Hey, John, I was going to say
want to weigh in? Yeah.
Well, I want to agree with Ken that experimentation and being open-minded to new ideas is really important. It doesn't mean you're going to adopt all of them. You might very rarely adopt any of them.
Right.
Thing every year where we have our interns that are historically from Southern Hemisphere, Italy, France, folks that have studied winemaking and come work harvest. And every year I give them one fermenter, which is 5 tons of fruit. So it's not a small amount of fruit. and I basically say they can do whatever they want, and no no limitations. And it's always interesting because usually they want me to engage with them every day for at least an hour about their one lot, and I'm like, well, I have 100 other lots. You guys do your thing, and we'll see if it'll be good. And I think last year we bottled it separately, and I was gonna, it was actually a really good wine, and so I was gonna call it beginner's luck. And they said that was too mean, so we called it Harvest Crew. And it's a fun wine that really, and I think I do learn it. It's sometimes I learn what I don't want to do when they do things with the.
Adam, is it always Pinot?
What's that?
Is it always Pinot?
Always Pinot from our Mount Richmond site, where we've got a lot of acres over there. And I mean, we've never had it, it's always made the cut. So, and this one year it was actually quite really good. So,
it's interesting you said that. I want to work harvest for you because on our previous panel, we had asked a question, Julie had asked a question about, if you get your interns to come in, and let's say that was you as an intern, what job would you give them and what would you want them to do? A lot of people said give them a squeegee or a power washer, but you're giving them a 5-ton tank. That's impressive.
Well, it's in return for a lot of 80-hour weeks. So.
But also, Adam, I would say it's really sort of in line with making sure that the future of Oregon is really in their blood, right? And that they love us as much, you are giving them the opportunity to play with our life source. They'll never forget that. That keeps it alive. It's awesome.
Yeah, empower them.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks, everybody. It looks like we've now reached our time limit. I wanted to thank all of the winemakers and panelists, everyone listening in. This has been fantastic. For those joining us next week, we'll be looking forward to seeing you in person or virtually on August 5th at the Willamette Valley Barrel Auction. And to all of you, thank you again for joining. Julia, you've been amazing through all this. I really appreciate it. We do have another 2 p.m. virtual tasting and call, so please tune in for that. Julia, you want to sign us out here?
Yes, thank you so much, John, for being an amazing moderator. Panelists, thank you. This was such a great discussion. I love listening to all of you. And thank you for your beautiful wines, of course. Folks joining us, thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll see you the rest of this week, I hope. And see everybody on August 5th. Take care.
Thank you.
See you, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.